You have probably smoked something in your life, or you know someone who has, or you have stood next to a fire and breathed in the smoke without thinking twice about it. What you did not know is that this behavior is at least 50,000 years old, possibly much older, and it did not start as a vice. It did not start as addiction. It started as something so practical, so medically intelligent, and so socially sophisticated that modern researchers are still working out the full picture. Stay with me. Let's start with fire, because everything about ancient humans and smoke begins with fire. Humans have been controlling fire for at least 400,000 years, possibly closer to 1,000,000. For most of that time, smoke was simply an unavoidable consequence of warm and cooked food. But at some point, and the evidence suggests this happened independently across multiple cultures on multiple continents, ancient humans stopped treating smoke as a byproduct. They started treating it as a tool. The first documented use of smoke as a deliberate tool is not what most people expect. It was not recreational. It was not spiritual. It was insect repellent. This is so obvious in retrospect that it is almost embarrassing that it took modern researchers so long to document it formally. Smoke repels insects. Every insect, mosquitoes, flies, ticks, biting midges, all of them avoid smoke. For a hairless primate living in tropical Africa with no fur barrier between its skin and the insect world, which we covered in the clothing video, smoke from a fire was the most effective insect barrier available. Ancient humans who slept near fires were not just warmer, they were protected from the parasite load that would otherwise make sleep miserable and dangerous. They were sleeping in a smoke bubble that kept malaria-carrying mosquitoes at a manageable distance. This was not accidental. Researchers studying contemporary forager populations in tropical environments document deliberate fire placement specifically for smoke direction. People position themselves relative to fires based on wind direction to maximize smoke coverage on their bodies. This behavior is so consistent and so practical that it appears to be very ancient. But smoke as insect repellent was only the beginning, because at some point ancient humans made a more sophisticated discovery. Certain plants, when burned, produced smoke that did more than repel insects. It changed how you felt. The archaeology of psychoactive plant burning goes back at least 2,500 years in documented form. Burial mounds in the Caucasus region of Eurasia contained braziers with hemp seeds and other psychoactive plant material, clearly burned deliberately in enclosed spaces. But the practice almost certainly predates the archaeological evidence. Organic material burns, evidence disappears. What remains are the behavioral patterns that show up independently in cultures that had no contact with each other. Shamanic traditions involving smoke inhalation appear on every inhabited continent, not similar traditions, structurally identical ones. A practitioner entering a modified state of consciousness through the deliberate inhalation of smoke from specific burning plants in order to access information or states unavailable in ordinary consciousness. This is not a cultural coincidence. The universality of this practice is the same signal we see with every behavior that appears independently across all human cultures. It solved a real problem. It produced real effects, and the effects were real enough that people sought them out deliberately and built elaborate ritual systems around them. The problem it solved was one of the most fundamental problems in ancient human group life. How do you make a decision when the stakes are too high for ordinary reasoning? A drought is coming. Do we move or stay? A rival group is approaching. Do we fight or negotiate? A child is sick. Which plant might help? Ancient humans did not have data. They did not have historical records. They did not have the accumulated scientific knowledge that modern decision makers can access. What they had was a brain that, under certain conditions, could make connections that ordinary conscious reasoning could not. And they had discovered that specific smokes could reliably produce those conditions. The shaman who inhaled specific smoke and reported visions or insights was not pretending. The neurological effects of psychoactive plant smoke on human brain function are real and measurable. The default mode network suppresses. Novel connections form between regions that do not normally communicate. Pattern recognition operates differently. Whether the insights produced were cosmically valid is a separate question. Whether they felt valid and useful to the group using them, that answer is written in the archaeological record across 50,000 years of consistent practice. Now, here is where tobacco enters the story. Tobacco, Nicotiana species, is native to the Americas. It was not known to the rest of the world before contact with the Americas in the late 15th century, but within the Americas, the evidence for tobacco use goes back at least 3,500 years in documented form. Some researchers believe it goes back significantly further, and here is what most people do not know about how tobacco was originally used. It was not casual. It was not recreational in the modern sense. It was ceremonial, medicinal, and and deeply social. Tobacco, among indigenous American cultures, was used in diplomatic contexts. Peace negotiations involved shared smoking. Agreements were sealed with shared tobacco. The shared smoke was a trust signal, a physical act of mutual vulnerability and mutual intoxication that created a bond between parties who might otherwise be enemies. This is not primitive superstition. It is sophisticated social technology. Sharing a psychoactive substance with someone requires trust. Becoming mildly vulnerable together in a controlled context creates social bonding through a neurochemical pathway we now understand involves oxytocin and dopamine. The peace pipe was not a symbol. It was a technology for turning strangers into allies, and then Europeans encountered it, brought it back, and within a century, the ceremonial, medicinal, social tool of indigenous American cultures had become the addictive mass-market product of the industrialized world. The thing that changed was not the plant. The thing that changed was the context. Strip away the ceremony, strip away the social function, strip away the medicinal framework, and the careful traditional protocols for use. What remains is a powerfully addictive substance with no container. Modern cigarette smoking is not the continuation of an ancient human practice. It is what happens when you take one chemical component of an ancient practice, the nicotine delivery, and remove everything that gave that practice meaning, control, and social function. The ancient humans who burned plants and breathed the smoke were doing something complex, intentional, and socially embedded. The modern cigarette is the ghost of that complexity, the chemical effect without the context that made it something other than pure addiction. You are not descended from people who smoked mindlessly. You are descended from people who understood that certain smokes changed certain things and who built entire systems of knowledge and ceremony around that understanding. That knowledge is mostly gone now, but the smoke is still here. If you want to know, you know what to do.